What if Tom Hardy played a young Wolverine in Days of Future Past? Not only that, what if it opened with the shocking revelation that Magneto was the one who actually killed JFK? Or what if the film didn't feature Quicksilver breaking Magneto out of prison, but instead saw Juggernaut smashing through the facility? And finally, what if the film featured Jubilee, Nightcrawler, and Scott and Jean's daughter Rachel, who sends Logan back in time? Believe it or not, all of these things almost happened. To find out how we went from all of that to the movie we got, let's dive in and take a look at what could have been X-Men Days of Future Past. Following the release of X-Men First Class, director Matthew Vaughn began outlining his plans for a sequel that would continue the story he started. Despite First Class receiving strong reviews, Fox was somewhat underwhelmed by its box office performance. While it wasn't a failure by any means, it didn't reach the financial heights the studio had hoped for, especially when compared to other superhero franchises dominating the early 2010s. Still, Vaughn believed the film had laid the groundwork for a longer, more deliberate trilogy. His original plan was simple. First Class would introduce the characters, the second film would develop them, and Days of Future Past would serve as the finale, a true culmination of both timelines. But that wasn't how it played out. Vaughn's concept for the second film was a direct continuation of First Class. He wanted to stay with the younger cast and allow audiences to grow more attached to those characters before escalating the stakes. Vaughn had mapped out a controversial and visually striking opening for the film, involving one of America's biggest mysteries. He planned to open the movie with the Kennedy assassination, revealing that the magic bullet was actually controlled by Magneto. That would have explained the physics of the bullet changing directions, which is a narrative conspiracy theorists have pushed for years. Magneto would have been angry that Kennedy took all the credit for saving the world in the first film, and never even mentioned, let alone credited, the mutants who were actually responsible. Vaughn also realized that with Professor X now confined to a wheelchair, the dynamic between the hero and villain had to evolve. He felt that Magneto needed a physical equal to spar with, someone who could match his intensity. He teased that the film would only introduce one major new character to serve as this rival. That nemesis turned out to be Wolverine, but it wasn't the Hugh Jackman version audiences were used to. Vaughn wanted to recast the role with a younger actor, specifically eyeing Tom Hardy to play a 1970s version of Logan. This second film would have focused on developing relationships between the core cast, Charles, Eric, Raven, Hank, and Logan, rather than rushing toward a crossover event. Only after that groundwork was laid would Vaughn bring everything together in Days of Future Past as the third and final chapter, a massive crossover event that would finally bring the legacy cast of McKellen, Stewart, and Jackman together with the younger generation. However, the studio had different plans. Despite the positive reception of First Class, Fox was concerned by its lower box office returns compared to previous entries, and they wanted a guaranteed hit immediately. Upon reading the treatment for the third movie, the studio decided the concept was too good to wait for. They effectively hot-shotted the decade-long story arc to bring back the legacy actors and secure a bigger box office number right away. This creative disagreement was a major factor in Vaughn's decision to leave the project, as he felt the studio wasn't listening to his long-term vision. With Vaughn out, the door opened for the return of original franchise director Bryan Singer. Singer, who had directed the first two X-Men films but left the franchise before completing his planned trilogy, saw this as an opportunity to not only tell a massive time travel story, but to fix the franchise's continuity and undo the controversial decisions made in The Last Stand, which had unceremoniously killed off major characters like Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Professor X. In the original Days of Future Past comic storyline, Kitty Pryde is a character sent back in time to prevent the dystopian future. However, the film version ran into a practical problem almost immediately. Ellen Page was 25 years old at the time of filming, while the First Class era was set decades earlier, meaning her character wouldn't have been alive. The creative team considered alternatives, including Bishop and Cable, but neither option felt right for the story they were trying to tell. Eventually, attention turned to Wolverine. Logan didn't age, was already deeply connected to both timelines, and was the most recognizable character in the franchise. Once that decision was made, the emotional framework of the film shifted. It allowed the filmmakers to flip the script on the relationship between Logan and Xavier. Instead of Xavier mentoring Logan, the student would go back in time to mentor the master, a concept the team found rich with irony and narrative potential. In early drafts of the script, it was Rachel Summers, the daughter of Jean Grey and Cyclops, who sent Wolverine back in time. Storm would have had a complex relationship with her, as Rachel represented the legacy of two close friends who were now dead. While the concept was emotionally rich, it created a massive storytelling burden. Since she was the orphan of two major characters who were dead in that timeline, explaining her backstory required too much exposition. The filmmakers felt they would have to provide a Wikipedia page worth of information just to introduce her, complicating a movie that was already packed with heavy sci-fi concepts. Ultimately, the idea was scrapped in favor of a simpler solution, shifting the power to Kitty Pryde, and framing it as a secondary mutation revelation that emerged later in life. The logic was that if Kitty could phase through space, perhaps her powers evolved to allow her to phase consciousness through time as well. The time travel narrative wasn't the only thing that went through significant changes. The roster of mutants was originally much larger. Bryan Singer considered including Jubilee as part of the team fighting Sentinels in the future, and even a young Nightcrawler in the past. He went as far as writing a scene for Nightcrawler, but ultimately cut it because he felt they were forcing too many mutants into an already credited story. Angel, Azazel, Riptide, and Emma Frost were originally intended to return, but once Days of Future Past became the focus, the script became too crowded. To resolve this, these characters were unceremoniously killed off screen between movies, their deaths used merely as motivation for Magneto's anger. Rogue initially played a much larger role in the film too, with an expanded storyline that made her essential to the mechanics of the time travel plot. In this version, Kitty Pryde, now revealed to be dating Iceman, is accidentally wounded after Wolverine's consciousness briefly phases between past and future when he sees Stryker in 1973. With Kitty unable to maintain Logan's connection to the past, Iceman proposes breaking into the remains of Cerebro at the former mansion to rescue Rogue, who is now being held captive there. Xavier, Magneto, and Iceman succeed in freeing her, but at the cost of Iceman's life, shifting his death from the final Sentinel battle to the rescue itself. Rogue then uses her powers to take over for Kitty, keeping Wolverine's mind anchored in 1973 until history is changed, with the film subtly suggesting that Logan is aware of the switch as he appears to sense Rogue's presence. Also cut was a romantic subplot between Storm and Wolverine, filmed to add emotional weight to their final stand. All of these scenes were ultimately removed from the theatrical cut for runtime and pacing reasons, before being restored after release in what became known as the Rogue Cut. Perhaps the most famous addition to the film, Quicksilver, wasn't in the original script at all. In the draft written by Vaughn and Kinberg, the mutant who breaks Magneto out of the Pentagon was actually Juggernaut. Vaughn had planned for Juggernaut to be the one smashing through the facility. However, when Singer took over, he decided to swap him out for Quicksilver, believing Juggernaut had already been used too recently in The Last Stand. That change resulted in the film's standout slow-motion sequence and also a casting shuffle. Josh Hellman had originally been cast as Juggernaut. When the character was cut, Hellman wasn't fired. Instead, he was recast as young William Stryker, while Evan Peters was brought in to play the speedster. The terrifying designs of the future Sentinels also evolved from Vaughn's original concept. Vaughn explicitly wanted the future robots to look like Mystique, envisioning thousands of Mystiques attacking the X-Men. Singer kept the core idea, but refined the visual execution. The future Sentinels were designed to resemble giant versions of the shapeshifter to demonstrate that their technological advancement was based on our shapeshifting DNA. This resulted in a sleek, feminine design covered in mechanical scales that moved as they adapted to attacks. The film's ending also played out very differently for Mystique and Wolverine. In the original ending, Raven didn't go off on her own. Instead, she chose to go with Charles. The film would have shown her in an altered future teaching a biology class alongside an older Hank McCoy. Meanwhile, Logan would have been retrieved from the Potomac River, not by Mystique in disguise, but by the real William Stryker, which would have directly set up the Weapon X storyline. However, the filmmakers felt this ending was too predictable and overly depressing. They wanted to subvert audience expectations. As a result, the ending was changed to have Raven escape and impersonate Stryker to rescue Logan. This twist was designed to make the ending feel more unexpected, leaving Raven's allegiance ambiguous and offering a glimmer of hope that, in this new timeline, Wolverine might have been spared the torture of Weapon X. Ultimately, Days of Future Past became something very different from what Matthew Vaughn originally envisioned. Rather than a carefully earned finale, it became a studio-driven course correction, designed to stabilize the franchise, restore audience goodwill, and undo years of continuity problems in a single film. Against the odds, it worked, but buried beneath that success is the outline of a different trilogy, one that took its time, developed its characters, and built toward Days of Future Past as a true ending rather than a reset. And like many stories in the X-Men franchise, it's another reminder that sometimes the most interesting version of the movie is the one that never got the chance to be made. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.